Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new series here on the Sick channel, where we will be diving into the reasons and some of the research behind why it's stupid, whatever it may be. Before we start, I want to thank Mrs. Sick, as this is basically her baby. She's done all the research, all the writing and all of the editing. I'm just here to make it sound good, and maybe throw in a couple of terrible jokes, as is my custom. Anyway, while in the future we will be going into the specific on the different woos, this week we are going broad strokes with alternative medicine. Why it's stupid. Complementary and alternative medicine, or CAMS, is an umbrella term to describe any medical theory, practice or treatment which is proven ineffective or inconclusive by scientific means. While most practitioners claim the treatments work in tandem with conventional medicine by supporting the body to heal itself, others dangerously declare they have the ability to cure all diseases with their methods, because of course they do. It is commonly known as alternative medicine, integrated or integrative medicine, and holistic medicine, among other personalised rebrandings, often to distinguish or distance themselves from the ridicule of being medically inadequate. I mean, why stop being medically inadequate when you could just change your name? That's why when word spread of my sexual performance, I changed my name to Kevin. Not that I was inadequate. They did it also in an attempt to make their practice seem more in line with modern medicine, but it's not unusual for alternative medicine to be based on outdated theories or continue to lean heavily on their spiritual or supernatural foundations. While there are some alternative practices which are considered somewhat useful, the majority are marked as being completely harmless or useless at the bottom of the scale, to having a high risk of bodily harm or causing debilitating and/or fatal side effects at the top. Most research favouring its potential is shockingly performed by alternative advocates or practitioners, often leading to tainted, invalid or sometimes falsified results, as many do not follow proper protocol or have apparently never heard of the scientific method. Generally, research conducted to biomedical standards finds the treatment to be ineffective or inconclusive, leading them to deduce the testimonies of perceived success in alternative medicine come down to the placebo effect, the therapeutic effect, or the natural course of the disease, which becomes attributed to the alternative treatments instead of one's immune system. Some of the main reasons people have come to believe in the effectiveness of alternative medicines are: 1. They already have a spiritual inclination towards its use, such as a belief in magic, vitalism, or similar concepts. 2. They have a bias towards things that are more natural treatment, such as herbal medicine. 3. They have a distrust of modern medicine or doctors. Or 4. While this is purely speculation on my part, I do think it is likely to be the most scientifically plausible reason. They are all big stupid dum-dums, but please do not quote me on that. A huge problem with this is people who develop a preference for these practices instead of seeking out medical help end up with undiagnosed or wrongfully diagnosed conditions by self-proclaimed practitioners with little to no training in botany, chemistry or pharmacology, are either self-medicating by ingesting unregulated amounts of medical compounds by making their own remedies at home, or pushing and selling their tinctures on to others. As you might imagine, this can be, and often is, incredibly dangerous. When people develop a distrust in conventional medicine, it is commonly due to a failure to manage or eradicate a medical issue, which is understandable when one is suffering, but in their desperation they often seek out any way to reduce their pain, no matter how initially skeptical they are. It becomes a big problem when they, either advised by alternative practitioners or from their own accord, stop taking their prescribed medication. And since most, if not all, medications have some side effects, they typically gain a sense of relief at first, leading them to believe alternative medicine is working, or that the original medication was making their condition worse. Which in some cases may be true, but this is commonly done without medical supervision, leaving their health and possibly others at risk For people with severe conditions, going without the correct treatment can be proven fatal. The history of alternative medicine is said to have started around the 19th century, but its roots began a century prior. The landscape of medical training during this time had very little standards, much like my content, and like the times before it, it was usually up to the universities to make medical laws, which were run by a Guild of Physicians or a medical corporation. Those under these schools were known as licensed or regular practitioners, but beyond basic anatomy, varied surgical techniques and some empirical data on the progression of various diseases, it was up to the individual doctors to determine diagnosis and treatment for their patients, which today could be seen similar to some alternative medicines. It was a common belief by physicians that sickness could be flushed from the body by consuming various concoctions known as purgatives, which would make the patient typically have diarrhea, even if their illness had nothing to do with digestions, and many others, including a treatment for rabies consisting of 40 grains of ground liverwort, 20 grains of pepper and half a pint of milk, to be taken for 4 mornings and a cold bath every day for a month. Blackhead spots were believed to be tiny worms that burrow into the face. A common treatment was a mixture of red wine, vinegar, prunella and nightshade water, often considered a heal-all. For breast cancer, which was often not seen until the tumour was noticeable or extremely painful, many physicians believed it could be cured by having more intercourse, having more children, or through topical salves made from various garden plants. It was no surprise outside these institutions people sold homemade remedies and provided various therapies which were often seen as less abrasive or at least cheaper forms of the current medicine. They were known as unlicensed or irregular practitioners. Medical consumerism reigned, as people were in a constant search to find relief for their ailments. Often practices were a patient-led guessing game. There was a thin line between what was considered regular and irregular medicine. Many licensed doctors would promote the use of irregular therapies, and unlicensed practitioners would recommend more conventional methods. Medical colleges would often state that the mind and the body were separate, so it was normal for physiological conditions such as anxiety and depression to be treated the same as indigestion. On what was considered appropriate treatment, most professionals turned to reports from mainland Europe to determine the effects of medicines and placed bans on certain treatments, if proven too deadly, based on the data collected, as opposed to not deadly enough, I guess. While most of Europe attempted to make medicine standardized, two of the biggest world powers at the time, Britain and America, continued to remain unregulated. From 1715 to 1789, the European movement known as Renaissance Humanism propelled a period called the Age of Enlightenment. The main aim was to separate the church from political power, but also circulate ideas of religious tolerance, political revolution, and standardized education through applying logic and gathering evidence, rather than relying on religious texts or superstition. The movement encouraged a revival of past knowledge over the previous 4 centuries. The greatest thinkers, scientists, and political figures met and discussed ideas. It is often thought the overthrowing of theocrats was associated with the scientific achievements such as the invention of the steam engine and the discovery of carbon dioxide. It was a time when it was cool to be a nerd. While the movement made great headway in some areas, it also brought forth various flawed medical theories which developed into popular forms of irregular medicine. Many of these doctrines incorporated spiritual notions blended with science, since God was considered logical. The 19th century medical front was both exciting and devastating. The growth of the British Empire brought more wealth, which brought access to new technology and improved research. But as people were drawn towards cities, they became much more crowded, leading to great outbreaks of what were named filth diseases, such as cholera and typhus. It was determined all people of the empire had a right to healthcare, but new diseases such as yellow fever were contracted. Greater steps were taken to determine the differences between regular and irregular practices in Europe and America. In Germany, state-sanctioned regulations were formed and medicines had to be approved before going to market. In France, under Napoleon, the licensing of medical staff became a matter of the state. During his conquest, Napoleon exported these regulations to other countries, establishing a medical standard. However, he did not remove irregular practices. Britain adopted the free market approach, with an increased focus on overall public health with the help of medical universities. By the 1870s, the American government did the same, but without the involvement of medical schools. This eventually led to the majority of the Western states creating a semi-protected marketplace, with state-approved and doctor-verified medicines to bring a sense of legitimacy and safety, which was a major counter to irregular practices. Despite these regulations, Victorian doctors continued to lack understanding of substances used in medicine, such as cocaine, yay! Heroin, woohoo! And opium, meh, were ingredients and were not considered dangerous in moderate amounts. They were advertised to deal with various common issues such as toothache or sore throats. Other treatments included chloroform for hiccups, laxatives for chickenpox, and arsenic for anemia. By the 1860s, germ theory was developed, while still thought of as controversial, especially by surgeons who felt insulted that they caused infection in patients by not washing their hands. Many physicians still used old theories of medicine despite them being ridiculed and no longer taught to new doctors. Gradually, germ theory became more accepted, leading to scientists identifying bacterial diseases such as typhoid, pneumonia, and the Black Plague. And by 1884, Charles Chamberlain had discovered viruses. It was not unusual for the irregular practitioners to continue to use old theories, as they had dedicated themselves to practices which would fall apart without them, so rejected the modern theories of medicine. Because of course, when you are proven wrong, the only thing to do is double down and kill even more people through your own incompetence. The most common irregular theories were based on mesmerism, the belief that an invisible force possesses all living things, could be manipulated to promote healing; vitalism, the belief that all living things have a vital spark which maintains their organic function; or humorism, adopted from ancient Greek and Roman physicians and philosophers, but dates back as far as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The idea that the body had self-regulating systems made up of humours or substances which, when out of balance, caused the body to develop illness. Around the 19th century, a political movement named agrarianism or populism emerged from Russia, inspiring the idea that rural workers were superior to city workers, not just in that they provided food for everyone, but also their lifestyle was healthier, cleaner, and more natural. The movement may have influenced the People's Party in the US, representing small farmers and business owners against the educated elites and government officials. This was a tactic used by irregular practitioners to encourage people into using their services rather than giving their earnings to licensed medical staff, stating that medical doctors cared little about their patients and were more concerned about making themselves the only option when it comes to healthcare. That their treatments would only suppress symptoms rather than curing the underlying cause, so that people would have to return repeatedly and waste their money. This developed into a social war between licensed doctors and unlicensed practitioners. They would write derogatory news articles against each other's practices, attempt to publicly discredit them, and have them removed from their profession. Now everyone just sends death threats to one another on social media. How we have evolved. In America, before the Civil War, anyone who wished to call themselves a doctor could do so without any training or regulations. It was up to the public to decide who was legitimate or not, and as the public are known for having such great opinions as reality TV is entertainment and Crocs are acceptable footwear, it became a minefield of useless and/or dangerous medicines, modernly collectively referred to as snake oil, which was a common treatment sold by travelling con artists who promoted it could cure various or even all common ailments. Medical schools were numerous and openly accessible, so most people could obtain qualifications without much difficulty. This resulted in competition between medical professions attempting to promote their schools as the best field, despite most treatments consisting of bloodletting, purging and ingesting poisons. Basically, at that time, even real doctors were mostly morons, just slightly more educated morons. These aggressive treatments led to frequent deaths. Many people lost their trust in the medical doctors and sought out less harsh alternatives. During this time, homeopathy and eclecticism in particular became popular for its simplicity with no side effects. And this sentence is also true if you take out the word side. Homeopathy promoted the idea of minute doses of medicine, whereas eclecticism regarded botanical remedies proven less intense than consuming mercury or enduring bloodletting was the way to go. The medical doctors realised that their clients were increasingly leaving them, and the growing potential of irregular practices was concerning not only to their livelihood, but to the furthering of medical science overall. The American Medical Association regarded homeopathy and eclecticism as forms of quackery. Despite this, they were greatly supported by the public, so they decided to enlist the support of government officials in organising regulations, making it so only the best doctors could be available by making doctors apply for a license. Through these restrictions, it became much more difficult for anyone to claim to be a doctor, eliminating a large chunk of the competition. This influenced medicine greatly in that medical schools were required to have a set of standards when teaching new doctors, and admission requires students to have a basic understanding of medicine, but also implemented compulsory clinical experience before they received their qualification. Having only the best students with the latest medical knowledge changed how physicians approached their treatments, as one could lose their license if they went outside the standards of the school, received too many complaints, or had too many recorded deaths. This caused a huge boost in medical research to determine the best way to practice. In the 1960s, the counterculture movement gained momentum, most often heavily involved with the disapproval of America's military involvement in Vietnam, but expanded into other issues concerning the structure of government, civil rights and social restrictions. This movement coincided with the rise of bohemianism and hippie lifestyle, leading to many people rejecting the ideals of their parents, the standards of society, and having a heartfelt dedication to not bathing. This is where alternative medicine has a huge resurgence, where people sought different ways to maintain their health through things like herbal remedies rather than pills. The 1970s had the emergence of the New Age spiritual movement, which attempted to remove associations with Christian beliefs and values and placed an emphasis on self-love and discovery with influences from Western esotericism and Eastern religions. While the New Age movement was greatly centred in the UK, by the late 1980s and early 90s it became well established with the US and parts of Europe. Typically, New Age practitioners adopted the belief of pantheism, in which all things are divine. It wasn't unusual for people to avoid seeing the doctor altogether and instead opting for self-proclaimed healers or shaman, as there was a strong social encouragement to heal yourself with various psychoactive drugs, traditional Eastern medicines, or holistic spiritual methods. The popularity of this option led to practitioners rebranding themselves as alternative to biomedicine and adopting a wide range of old irregular medical theories and practices as their own. There were several misleading advertisements stating that alternative medicine was just as effective as conventional versions. Some claimed them to be even better as they did not contain chemicals. Yes, chemicals! That's the thing that's always bad, and certainly not the thing that everything is made out of, you morons! And doctors were aggressive elitists who showed little compassion to their patients. We've heard this song and dance before, haven't we, folks? The growing desire for natural products causes the market to lean towards its favour, and the more the public demand, the more the scientific journals were increasingly encouraged to promote it, giving alternative practitioners a further sense of legitimacy. In 1991, US Senator Thomas Harkin became convinced his allergies were cured by bee pollen pills and gave $2 million to create the Office of Alternative Medicine in order to research and test the effectiveness of alternative medicines. The OAM stated that they were dedicated to exploring alternative medicines with scientific methods. Eventually, tensions grew when a Dr. Joseph Jacobs was appointed the first director of OAM. Jacobs insisted on rigorous testing, making Harkin criticise his unbendable rules of randomised clinical trials, saying that the bee pollen pills worked for him so that it wasn't necessary for the scientific community to understand how they worked before the American public could benefit from it. I would make an absurdist joke about that statement, but nothing is more absurd than that statement. The resistance to the use of scientific methods caused Jacobs and others to complain, saying that nonsense had trickled down into every aspect of this office, although I would argue that nonsense had clearly formed it, and something president joke. Harkin responded by going on TV with cancer patients who blamed Jacobs for blocking access to untested treatments. God forbid they are given proven medicines that won't just make them worse or something. This led to Jacobs resigning from frustration. As time went on, the OAM gained further criticism, saying it was a cover for quackery and that their practices violated the basic laws of physics and were closer to witchcraft. In 1998, the OAM was placed under the careful watch of the National Institution of Health. Harkin responded to the strict controls by making the OAM an independent centre and increased its budget to $90 million a year. Woof! It was renamed the National Centre of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, or NCCAM. As we know, changing your name means you are now immune from all criticism forever. It was approved by Congress, but was held under high standards that it must have a scientific approach to the research and training of alternative medicine. In 2009, the centre was granted $123 million a year. $123 million a year! Oh, and here I am eating stray cats with ramen. Despite a long history of producing hardly any proof of the effectiveness of these approaches, members of the biomedicine community complained that $2.5 billion had been wasted. By 2013, around 50% of Americans were using some form of alternative medicine, with annual spending of around $34 billion. In 2014, the NCCAM was rebranded again to the National Centre of Complementary and Integrative Medicine, presumably to distance themselves from the high amounts of ridicule alternative medicine received from medical doctors and other well-informed researchers and organisations, and very handsome famous people who are also good at the sex, who continue to point, laugh or just shake their heads in disbelief despite the name change. In 2015, the FDA held a hearing on the regulation of homeopathic products, and by 2017, it was recommended to have warnings of its ineffectiveness labelled on the products. Also in 2017, the National Health Service of the UK recommended doctors stop prescribing homeopathic remedies. England, finally did something right. There have been great strides taken to lessen the promotion and use of ineffective alternative medicines, but it still remains popular despite the huge amount of research against it. This is the main reason why we feel it is important to put an end to bad science and woo. While some of it is technically harmless, it is still promoted as medicine, and while some can sort of be helpful with reducing pain through the placebo and therapeutic effects, it doesn't help control the spread of disease or the eventual worsening of one's condition. Illness cannot be cured by positivity, a handful of sage and a bag of leeches. People need to stay informed. From personal experience, it is easy for the naive, desperate and suggestible to be drawn into the narrative without having someone to point out its flaws. So yeah, This is why it's stupid. You're welcome, Internet. When you build the life-size statue in my honour, just remember that I am 7 foot wide. Well, that was good, wasn't it? I want to again thank Mrs. Sick for doing basically all of the work, which involved countless hours of research, countless hours of drawing and creating some really good visual gags, I think you'll agree, and the biggest editing job she's ever undertaken. I'm really proud of her, really impressed with what she's created here, and I hope you all enjoyed it. These take a long time to make, including me trying to record without doing all the usual screw-ups. But if you enjoyed this, let us know, because we do plan on making more in the future. And it wouldn't hurt to give Mrs. Sick a little bit of encouragement. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye! Do you find yourself wondering, how can me show humans I am the smart? Is am the way to thinking being a purchase? Well, to answer your incredibly poorly worded questions, yes! I think. Honestly, I have no idea what you want, but I'll be damned if I don't take this as an opportunity to sell you things. Like new improved Sick brand merch, now featuring the designer of almost all Sick brand merch. Right, the name's on the tip of my tongue. I want to say Cheryl Pringle? No, wait, it's Mrs. Sick. That's right, I always forget she exists. Also, handsome, famous, and good at the sex tease. Ampersand, not forgetting this pretty badass comic book style one that I would buy myself if I wasn't so poor. Sick brand merch, because we're tired of eating stray cats. Oh, there's one now. Get it!